he was going to sustain the New World Order through the instruments which had sustained US power for quite a long while. And what were those instruments? Number one, military power. Because the United States, even at that time, had more than 800 military bases girding the globe. And within a few years, the US was talking about the type of military power that stretches from the inner depths of the ocean to the outer reaches of space. Total spectrum dominance. So that's the military power which the US thought would help it to sustain this New World Order. It was going to depend upon economic power to sustain this New World Order. And what was this economic power? The US dollar, the world's reserve currency, its control over economic resources, the vital strategic routes that were important for its economic power, and of course, its dominant role in international economic institutions like the World Bank, the IMF, and at that time GATT, and so on and so forth. The US was going to depend upon its control over people's minds and hearts, which is perhaps more fundamental than military power or economic power. Its control over the global media, its control over culture, entertainment, which are essential to dominance and hegemony. And the US knew that it would continue to depend upon these sources of power to sustain, to perpetuate its dominance. The US was also very much aware of the importance of regime change as a fourth dimension of hegemony. Ensure that in various parts of the world you have leaders, governments who are subservient, who are submissive. If you look at the situation after the Second World War, there have been numerous instances of regime change, which I will not elaborate upon, but I'll highlight just one, because it's something which we in this part of the world don't pay much attention to. The regime change that occurred on the 11th of September 1973 in Chile. The overthrow of a democratically elected leader, Dr. Salvador Allende, and the eventual emergence of a military dictatorship. And this is what the US has done over and over and over again, as yet another mechanism of control and dominance. But there is something else which was part of the post-1991 scenario. The US realized that apart from these four dimensions, it had to devise a way of dealing with recalcitrant states, of leaders who, in spite of everything, in spite of the US's ability to change regimes, to control minds, to control economic resources, to deploy its military power, in spite of all this, there would still be governments, there would still be regimes that were against US power. And not just US power, against Israeli power. Because this idea actually is an idea more closely associated with Israel. And what is this idea? It is an idea which emerged towards the end of the Cold War. And what is this idea that emerged towards the end of the Cold War? It was what happened in Afghanistan. In Afghanistan, the US realized the tremendous potential of manipulating religion, Islam, for the purpose of defeating its enemy. Let's not forget that in Afghanistan, the Mujahideen, a group that emerged perhaps spontaneously at one stage because of the anger at the occupation of Afghanistan, but the Mujahideen, without any doubt at all, well established with numerous writings since then. The Mujahideen were manipulated, they were used by the US against the Soviet Empire. And they succeeded. The US, its allies, they succeeded in defeating the Soviet Union with the help of the Mujahideen. The US's greatest rival at that time, defeated by the Mujahideen, 60,000 Soviet soldiers killed. One of the main reasons, according to analysts, of why the Soviet Union disintegrated in the years that followed, partly because of the role of the Mujahideen in defeating the Soviet Union in Afghanistan. Now, this is something very important. The US realized the efficacy of manipulating religion, creating groups which, because of their passion for religion, would be committed to a particular cause, using such groups in order to further its own political agenda. Out of the Afghan war was born Al-Qaeda. And Al-Qaeda was a creation of the CIA, a fact that was admitted in the British Parliament by Robin Cook, the former British Foreign Secretary. 1 week after he made that famous speech as a backbencher, Robin Cook died. I think this is something which a lot of people know. So you see the role of Al-Qaeda. Al-Qaeda was the idea that gave birth to a lot of other similar outfits that have dominated the so-called terrorist landscape. After the Afghan war, in the midst of this new world order, we had a few incidents here and there that the world didn't really take notice of. 1993, the incident in the basement of the World Trade Center. And then you had 1994, what had happened in Saudi Arabia, and then 1996, Gulf of Eden, 1998, East Africa, one after another, different incidents that took place. The culmination was, of course, 9/11. 2001, 11th of September. Because the message that the US wanted to convey to the world as a way of defeating forces that were recalcitrant, that were not willing to submit to US dominance, was this. You know, these people who are against us are all terrorists. This was the message. They're all terrorists. And for Israel, this was an important message to put across, because Israel wanted the world to know that those who opposed Israeli occupation were terrorists. They could not be liberation fighters, they could not be freedom fighters, they were terrorists. So that message had to get across. And equally important, the message had to get across that these terrorists are a threat to human civilization. So the attack takes place on American soil. The first time there's been such an attack in American history, to show the whole of humankind that these terrorists are a challenge to, well, human civilization. So let's keep that in our mind as we look at a couple of related issues. 9/11 and after 9/11. You'll find that the fingerprint of Al-Qaeda and groups associated with Al-Qaeda were in a number of other incidents. 2002, we had Bali. 2005, we had Madrid. 2006, we had London. In every instance, somehow it was linked with Al-Qaeda or with groups affiliated to Al-Qaeda. So this huge story was being constructed about the terrorists, about the challenge posed by the terrorists. And it has gone on. The Arab uprisings, starting from 2011. Again, the same approach. They moved into Libya, the so-called terrorists, created chaos in Libya, but the main purpose was, of course, to overthrow Gaddafi. An individual who was, in a sense, resisting their dominance in his own temperamental way. And then, of course, they tried to get rid of Bashar al-Assad, and they have not succeeded because of their total misreading of the situation in Syria. But nonetheless, we know that the so-called terrorists there were sponsored, trained, funded, the network established for them by the CIA, by some of Syria's neighbors who were heavily involved in this enterprise, Saudi Arabia, Turkey, Qatar. My friend Michelle has referred to all this. They're all part of that game.